Welcome to Crossing the Line, the NC Sesame podcast. I'm your host, Joelle Casteix. Before we get started, a quick reminder. Producing this podcast and providing NC Sesame's research, resources, and survivor support does cost money. If you value this work, please help us continue it by making a donation at ncsesame.org/donate. Now onto the show. Today's guest brings a rare perspective to school safety. Matt Antkowiak is a survivor, a retired police chief, and a veteran investigator who has spent decades responding to crimes against children and institutional misconduct. We're talking about war stories, warning signs, leadership in crisis, and what schools must do when a student speaks out. Matt, welcome to Crossing the Line.
Man, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invite. Love what you're doing. The work is so important. And before we get into that, I just want to say, guys, it's work that's being done by podcasts like this that are helping us get the word out. So please support this podcast and support the effort.
Thank you. You could be
Absolutely.
You'd be in every episode now.
Well, there you go.
So I was introduced to you through Faith Coulson, who's a member of our board, and she sent me your media kit, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I read it, and then I looked you up, and I was like, holy smokes, this guy's a rock star. So,
well, I don't know about that. I'm not musically inclined, and you haven't heard me sing yet, so.
Well, give our listeners a bit of your origin story. Tell us, how you got to where you're sitting right now.
Yeah, usually when I get introduced, people want to talk about, hey, the retired police chief, the human trafficking investigator for Homeland Security. They want to talk about Army veteran or advocate. But really what it was I was 11 years old when I was sexually abused. And I had no idea until I got into therapy 40 years later that I'd been carrying the secret about my abuse and the shame and guilt that wasn't mine. And I had not noticed it until I got into therapy that everything pointed back. My entire life story points back to my sexual abuse. And what I discovered was that for 40 years, I had been pursuing the very darkness and evil that had wounded me as a child that I could not put words to and speak to until a press conference. I was working a lightning strike moment in my career, one of the most prolific cases I'd ever worked, a principal, a teacher, a coach, sexually abusing two different kids at the same time on the same campus, not necessarily connected. And right before I walked into a press conference, my lead investigator pulled me aside to give me a piece of information that was fresh off the press. And I didn't have a chance to process it, but it brought me right back to being 11 years old. And so I walked into an interview with Scoop Jefferson with WFAA, and in the middle of the interview, he said, "This seems deeply personal to you." And in that moment, I shared my abuse. I said, "Well, it's because I'm a survivor of sexual abuse." And a pin drop in the room. You could hear it. And my assistant chief, my admin assistant, the CID commander, the videographer, the reporter were just, no one had words. And then he said, "But you're so put together." And I thought, man, if you only lived in my mind for a minute, you'd realize how unput together I am. And then I walked from that meeting. I get up and say, "We got to get to the press conference." They didn't leave the room. They just sat there in silence, not knowing what to say. Walk into the press conference, and another reporter said, "Chief, you seem a little bit more emotional today than you normally are. And you seem like you're on a vendetta." And I said, "I am. I'm on a vendetta to stop sexual abuse, and anybody that won't join me, you're part of the problem." And she's, what makes you on that vendetta? It was like the Holy Spirit was telling her to ask me a very specific question. I said, well, the reason why is because I suffered sexual abuse as an 11-year-old boy for years, and I carried it for 40 years with me. And so, yes, I'm on a vendetta. And that vendetta is to bring justice for people since I never got justice for myself. And so that kind of launched this whole mess. And that reporter has become a really good friend of mine, Scoop Jefferson. And the first thing he said to me was, best advice I've received as a survivor was get into therapy. He said, "You need to get into therapy, Chief, because I know you have it all put together, but I just think you need some healing." And so I did that. And as a tough guy, you don't do therapy, right? But man, it's revealed so many things about why I'm the way I am and who I am. And it's accelerated my healing. By no means am I a fixed product through this. And then the second bit of advice he gave me was a couple weeks later, he said, "Would you write a book? Would you consider doing that?" And I said, that sounds like a horrible idea, Scoop. We were having lunch at a local restaurant. I looked at him and said, man, that sounds terrible. And he goes, but you got to have journals. And I'm like, I got journals from 30 years of being an investigator. He goes, well, you have the book already, but just tell your story through it. Because he says, I think there are men out there that need to hear your story. And then I said, well, I think there are people that need to hear my story. And so that's what landed us here. And I that press conference kind of put me on the map a little bit locally because there was that press conference got a lot of views, and then there was multiple media interviews with single outlets, and I got called to testify to the Texas Senate on child safety and sexual abuse in schools. Um, Based on that investigation, because in that investigation, like many investigations, the sexual abuse was bad, but what was worse to those victims was the institutional abuse that followed and the predator propaganda that followed, and superintendents and HR directors that covered things up and passed the trash and set this child up to be sexually abused. And so I was down there at this Texas Senate testifying on, very vanilla testimony. As a police chief, I've done them countless times. And then I kind of got frustrated because I was told that two of the senators were going to be on my side and asked the tough questions to get me to open up. And so I just carpet bombed Fort Worth ISD in the middle of the press conference, or in the middle of the testimony at the Senate, and named people's names. And of course, everybody cautioned me from doing it, saying, well, you're going to get charged. They're going to sue you for slander. Well, I have a friend that's an attorney. He's like, if it's true, it's not slander. And so I brought with me the evidence, Fort Worth ISD memos that said it all, that had been covered up, that took criminal search warrants. They wouldn't cooperate because they were protecting the institution's reputation over the safety of a child. And so that Senate thing apparently put me on the radar with a lot of advocacy groups, and I've been doing a lot of work. And then I started running into some obstacles. The state started auditing my police department on a regular basis for nonsense, started auditing me and my records. And so young, for a retired guy, March 3rd, I said, I'm done. God's called me into this, and I'm going to run this course. And I retired so that there's no pressure on me. I can speak my mind like every other citizen can speak their mind. I can hold people accountable. And so we opened up a private investigations firm as well, so that I have the investigative capability to do work too. And so that's what got us where we are today, to visit. And we want to make an impact on this. We want to try to move the needle.
So tell me and our listeners, so you were a police chief, and describe that role and describe what got you into looking into the Fort Worth ISD and how that whole investigation unraveled.
Yeah, sure. So, I've learned that trauma does a couple things to you when trauma occurs when you're a child. First thing it does, it makes everything your fault. And so I've lived this life of always feeling responsible for things. And I've learned that it's not all my fault, right? I've learned that my past does set up my future, but it doesn't define who I am. But for most of my career, there were two things that were present. Everything was my fault. I couldn't get the case solved. I couldn't get this done, or I couldn't, serve the victim well. I carried those burdens. And the second thing I realized was I was chasing trauma worse than mine. I was trying to settle my internal pain by making it more normal. I was normalizing my trauma by putting myself into darkness where trauma was worse. And so that really led my law enforcement career. When I left the military, I had a stint as a firefighter. And when there was a massive tornado that hit Oklahoma, I talk about this in my book. I was standing in this destroyed apartment complex, and my sexual abuse started with grooming in an apartment complex, and specifically, the first touching that occurred was in a swimming pool. And I was learning how to quote swim by this trusted family friend. And so fast forward, now I'm 25 years old. I'm a firefighter, standing at this wreckage of this massive tornado that hit, and the pool was pristine, but everything was knocked down around. And I was standing there by this pool, and I realized that all I've been doing for the last 3 years was responding to trauma, and I wasn't impacting it. And so I became a cop. And with this idea that I was going to take on the world, and just like every academy story, why are you a police officer? Because I'm going to defeat evil. I'm going to fight crime. And so I got into policing, and my focus point on policing, without it being spoken out loud, was I was really putting myself into every sexual abuse case I could find, and working those cases. And I worked sexual crimes for 16 of my 35 years. And because of my specific work in child exploitation, I got asked to spearhead a task force with Homeland Security. And so I moved up the ranks. I was a lieutenant in charge of it, of the entire criminal investigations division of my police department. And it was time to, what are we going to do with some of these cases? They were out of our scope because of jurisdictional reasons, but I felt obligated. So I reached out to a buddy of mine in Homeland Security and said, hey, I want to kick this over to you guys, partly because I didn't trust the agency where they occurred at, to really do good work there. They were known for traumatizing victims rather than investigating cases. And so I got Homeland Security to jump on it because I found a federal nexus. And so then that led to us deciding we were going to create the North Texas Human Trafficking Task Force. And our agency got involved right away. I begged the chief to let me be the guy that went over there, and he said, yeah. And so I was able to step away from my responsibilities at my local agency, and I worked with Homeland Security, working specifically child sexual abuse cases. And, through the process of that, what I was realizing is that I was still being handcuffed by leadership, and administrations were not allowing us to fully go after some of these cases the way we needed to. And victims were, or not victims, but suspects were being allowed to plead down to charges that weren't related to sexual abuse. They were able to get off registries. They were able to keep licenses. And I was like, man, this just doesn't work. But I didn't have the authority to be the decision maker. So I retired my first time from policing in 2020 to pursue this journey on my own. And I was just, as a private investigator, I was even finding more difficulty. So I had the opportunity to step into a police chief role at a school district. And I'd never been in school policing before, but I'd been around it. I'd run the school resource programs as a commander, but I'd never really done much with it. But I got the opportunity to become a police chief. Well, what I realized very quickly was the police chief sets policy. As the chief administrator, you get to decide how you approach cases. You get to decide what cases you take on. You're the kind of the gatekeeper, not just to the DA's office, the prosecutor's office, but you're the gatekeeper even on intake by how you write policy. So I became a policy geek and really just started figuring out, how do I make the policies really serve the victims? And I had a incredible superintendent that she begged me to come to work for her and underpaid me. So I had a lot of leeway to get her to agree with me and get the board to agree with me. And the board really set us up. We didn't know we were setting ourselves up for what would be two crazy cases that would come back to back that I would say encompassed every aspect of my history in those two cases. One of the cases was a beloved coach that was grooming a young lady, and it had crossed the line of grooming into an inappropriate relationship. And this was, I will call, the spiritual son of the superintendent. And so it was the first test of my relationship and leadership with my boss over a criminal investigation. And I remember the day like it was yesterday. I walked out of her office, and she was her normal jovial self, but she could see the weight on me. She could tell something wasn't right. And I said, boss, we need to talk. And I shut the door and I said, this is going to hurt. And I said, whether we stay in relationships is going to depend on how you respond to this. And so just kind of to tell the listeners this and you this, is that police chiefs have a lot of authority. However, they have civilian oversight. And in high profile cases, civilian influence by your civilian leadership takes a toll. You see it if you turn on any news channel. And I don't care if it's left or right, political lines. Every police chief, it has pressure by their because you work at their pleasure. And anybody says that law enforcement is not impacted by the political powers to be, they just don't understand law enforcement. So I was going to find out very quickly with her, are we going to do this right or not? And in the conversation, she looked at me and said, Chief, do the right thing. And so the right thing resulted in me I took point on the case. And that's kind of unusual for a chief, but I was the guy on the department that had the most experience in sex crimes. This was a very difficult case because it involved federal aspects, because there was interstate sending of information and receiving of information that was sexual content, CSAM. And beyond that, there was a local aspect, and there was a DA that really didn't want to play well with us. And so I took the case on myself and was the oversight and the investigator and was training some of my younger guys how to do it. And we got a search warrant. And I drove down to Waxahachie, Texas on a Friday afternoon, middle of nowhere by myself, called the police agency down there, said, I'm going to this house to pick this guy up. You can come with me or not. And they went with me, and I handcuffed him, drove him to the jail. And he ended up losing his teaching credentials, pled to a lesser crime, but still had to register and lost privileges. And I remember when I finished that case, I just didn't feel good. And it was kind of the predecessor to really me coming out and telling people, my outcry would happen to me, because I just didn't feel very good about it. I was expecting to high five, and the high fives happened. We were celebrating everything outwardly, but inside, I was like, man, something fell flat for me. Fast forward a year and a half, and the case with Fort Worth ISD came up. We had a principal who called me and said, hey, you need to look into this coach that's grooming a kid. And so we started looking into it, and we were able to prove it. Mirandized this person. They admitted to it under Miranda, and we were moving forward that case. And the person that was the complainant, I was interviewing her. She said something, and if you're a victim of sexual abuse, and you're in a conversation with somebody who's been sexually abused, and it's a long conversation, it's in the realm of abuse, you can tell. And there's things they say or responses they give to comments and I knew in that moment that this young lady that I was talking to had been sexually abused. And I thought, man, again, here I am, I'm closing a case, yet I just felt flat. And so I straight up, and this was kind of off script, I straight up said, hey, something's happened to you. And I need you to know that you can tell me. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to blame you. I'm just going to listen to you. And I can't promise I can do anything about it, but I'd like to help you. And I said, and if you don't want to talk, that's okay. I just want to let you know it's not your fault. And she broke down. And trying not to be emotional right now. But in that moment, she started talking about, I can't tell you. And I was like, why can't you tell me? And she says, because it involves the principal and my teacher. And it opened this case. And what the principal did by trying to turn me on to this other case, because we had a tip that there was an abuse going on at that campus. So there was a heightened police presence. We were starting to really dig in as behind the scenes, and he knew it because he'd been in those administrative meetings. And unbeknownst to us, we didn't know that he was involved in it directly. But I got this when she said I started looking into him, and then I realized that there were some things that didn't make sense in his employment history. And I found out that he had brought the suspect, into the office. So you got this trusted teacher, this trusted principal brings a victim into the principal's office. And the principal comes up with a plan for them to continue their relationship. But you got to do it off school grounds. You can't do it here anymore. And you're gonna go tell the police officer that there's this other situation going on that you're aware of. So he sent the victim of one full-on sexual assault, sexual abuse case to a police officer to point to a smaller case to get us distracted. And which, by the way, is all kinds of crimes, which he has pled guilty to. And so here I sit there going, but I just knew it was the experience thing. I can tell you, for example, I can't give you the definition of what makes an image child pornography, but I can tell you when I see it. Right. And I use that example. Yes, I can statutorily tell you what child pornography is, obviously. But there are certain things in life where you just know what it is. And I knew in that moment when that little girl, and I say little girl, that high school student shared with me her abuse, that it was way more than what she was sharing with me. I just knew. Too many cases, too many victims, too many cases, or too many, trials and convictions, too many interviews and interrogations. I just knew that I knew. And so I pulled the principal in for an interview. Said, tell me about this case. And I did it under the guise of the other case, but I knew what I was going for, and he slipped up. And one thing that I've learned to do is bridge with with suspects, just like I can with a victim. I can hold a victim's hand because I've been a victim. I knew what that looked like because I lived it. I knew what it felt like. And for right or wrong, I had been leveraging, and I knew this. I've been leveraging my experience as a victim to connect with victims to get them to trust me, without ever telling them I was a victim, because I wasn't going to tell anybody what happened to me. But I also knew the predators, because the guy that sexually abused me for 3.5 years, multiple times, every single week. It wasn't, I mean, he was a close family friend. And so I had lived with, and not physically lived with, but I lived with this predator. And I watched him evolve from this smiling, friendly guy in public to this monster that threatened to kill me and kill my family, presented guns in the sexual assaults, did horrific things in the sexual assault. So, and then go right back to this bipolar type behavior of being jovial and nice. And so I deeply had this experience. And the strange thing is, most victims are very similar, and so are most predators. And so when I was visiting with that principal, I realized he's a predator. But the girl had been very clear with me that he had not touched her. So there was this strange, like, I trusted my gut, but I couldn't get anything to connect it. And then she finally told me who the assailant was, who the suspect was. And so I started digging him in. I started seeing them on film together a lot. And I thought, man. So then I pulled my detective aside. I said, we're going to investigate the principal now. He's like, what? I'm like, I want you to find everything out about this guy. I want to know when he cut his first teeth. I want to know where he went to elementary. I find everything you can about this guy. If I ask you a question, you better be able to tell me about him. So they went on this wild goose chase down this runway of, I know this guy's bad. He's involved in this in some way, but I didn't know how. And then finally, after 4 or 5 interviews with this victim, we finally got her to tell us what the principal had done, which was this meeting, this cover up. And well, you don't just graduate into covering up sexual abuse if you don't know sexual abuse, right?
Yeah.
And so then we started looking, and I'm like, why is this guy bouncing back and forth from corporate America to schools? And so what we found out in 1993, this principal was a teacher at a place called the Arlington Christian Academy. It's now closed, but it was a small private school. And a victim had come forward to the police department, and the police department basically wrote him a traffic ticket, a Class C misdemeanor for inappropriate touching, and dropped the case. Didn't really do much with it. But he wrote an apology letter in his handwriting to her.
Ooh.
So anybody that says that going on social media and doing interviews and being transparent doesn't break cases, I was doing interviews on this case well before I outcried in that one interview. And this person sends me a message and says, hey, I'm a victim of him. And I'm thinking it's the teacher, Barbie, but it's Adam's the principal. And I'm like, wow. So I go meet with, and she's like off the rails. I mean, it's there. I'm going to use some terms that might sound kind of, I'm going to say mean, but I don't mean to sound. There are good victims and bad victims. And what I mean by that, from a prosecutor standpoint, is there are people I can put on the stand I know are going to be good. I know there are ones that aren't. And this one, I was like, man, this is not going to be a good victim. I'm going to have to find another victim of him if we're going to try to get him. And she was a bad victim because the case was out of statute of limitations. So it's horrific situation for this young lady. I've cried with her, talked with her, and I got her justice, but just not for her crime. And we're still working with her and interact with her, and she's been so helpful through this case. But she gives me a box, and in that box is this apology letter. And I was like, what? And so I pulled his application from the school district, and it's the handwriting's right on. So I had a handwriting person looking there like, this is the same person. So I got an admission of abuse by this guy from 1993. So then we start diving. And so everybody's cooperating until we get to Fort Worth ISD. So we go to Fort Worth ISD, and we're like, hey, we're investigating crime. It involves a possible person that was a former employee of yours. We need to see their personnel file. And at first, the HR director was like, oh, yeah, we'd love to help you. Who is it? So we give them the information. They said, yeah, just get back with us. So we call them back a couple days later, a week later, whatever it was. And they're like, yeah, we need a subpoena. We're not giving that to you without a subpoena, which that's okay. That just keeps them safe and whatever. So we issue the subpoena, and they say, we're not giving it to you. I'm like, what? I said, what do you mean you're not giving it to me? You don't have a choice. I'm a law enforcement officer asking. Well, what they didn't know was we had been working with the FBI on this case at this point. Again, go back to my background. I know what the federal government brings to the table in an investigation. So when we had an investigation that was any nexus to the feds, we bring them in because they have a lot more reach, a lot more resources. And so I had the FBI agent working with me, and I said, "Hey, we might need your help on this one." And she's like, "Why?" I said, "Well, we're a small agency. You're not. They're going to stonewall us. They've already tried. But we don't want to tell them we're working with the FBI yet. Would you go with us to try to pick this up one more time? And when we think it's right, would you tell them who you are?" And this agent's great. She's like, "Love it. Let's go." So we go and get a search warrant now because I'm done being nice. Public entity funded institution, largest school, second largest school district, DFW, one of the largest ones in the state, is telling me they're not going to cooperate in a criminal investigation into a former employee. They're not cooperating. So I go to a Tarrant County judge and I tell him the story. He goes, yeah. And he says, come back if they give you a hard time. Well, he issues the search warrant. We go there, FBI's with us. And they tell us no. They're like, yeah, we're not giving you anything.
That's
And so
insane.
it's insane.
Yeah.
And so my detective says, well, we're going to lock the building down and we're going to kick everybody out. We're going to bring an 18-wheeler up here. We're going to let every computer, every file into a truck, and we're going to shut your school district down. And this person has the gall to say, good luck. So then the FBI just says, okay, well, let me show you this, and opens up her credentials. It says, I'm with the FBI. So if you don't want to cooperate with them, I can actually bring enough people down here to shut this school district down, take it over if I need to, but you're going to cooperate. And then they literally reach over and hand us the file that they didn't want to give us. They didn't have to go get it. They already knew. They already knew what we were looking for. And they knew who we were looking for. And the reason they didn't want to give it to us because there was an internal memo that I already knew I was looking for, because I had gotten another tip saying, look for memos in his HR files. So it wasn't in a discipline record. It wasn't on his permanent file. It wasn't sent to TEA, but there was a memo internal from the HR director to the superintendent saying, in lieu of criminal investigation and referral, resign. So by the way, this is after 2017.
Yeah.
Which was the pass the trash law. So it's a crime. But you can't arrest an institution, right? And so despicable behavior. I carpet bombed them in the media. I carpet bombed them at the Senate hearing, and that piece of evidence really didn't matter, but it mattered immensely. And the reason so what I've learned as an investigator, it's often obscure things that solve cases. It's the thing that you may go as a novice, oh, why does that matter? Why does the personnel file of the principal matter in a case where a teacher is doing the abuse? Because we knew that the principal facilitated the abuse, and I needed to get him to turn on the teacher to get the conviction on the teacher. So often you take out target B to get target A. And obviously the bad actor in this, so we thought, was the teacher. We didn't realize that this was going to open a Pandora's box of 11 victims of the principal that have come forward.
Oh my God.
And as of last week, a lady ready for this, from Weatherford, Texas calls me because the primary suspect, that's the teacher, had sexually abused when he was a children's pastor at this church out there. And this lady's daughter had just committed suicide because she could not deal with her sexual abuse. But in a journal, she had journaled it all out. She wanted to know what to do with it. And so when people say that social media and podcasts like this and reports on print or reports in TV stations doesn't move investigations, I've been able to put my hands on hard data that move the needle with the DA's office to actually run this case full course. And we got that principal on a failure to report sexual abuse charge. Unheard of in Texas for them to actually criminally prosecute somebody for that. Because I was able to demonstrate to the DA, you're dealing with a bad actor. I have my own term for this. It's called the Al Capone approach.
Yeah. Get him on something.
Right.
Yeah.
Get him on something. And I knew this guy's a bad actor. And I wanted to get him on something, get him on a felony that's going to make it really hard for him to speak about it in an interview. And so it was going on the TV and telling the story and article after article. And by the way, police chiefs don't like transparency with media. I got real hate mail over the fact that I was transparently talking about my investigation. I wasn't giving up our practices and our methods, but I was using the media to get this case because we weren't getting the help we needed. And it's amazing that once we really got going and people realized, oh crap, he's got the FBI on his side on this one. And I make fun of the FBI all the time. I love to. It's just a local cop thing. But I'm gonna tell you, the FBI was, even though they really didn't do anything from filing cases or any of that, them being willing to stand with us and go to these churches, which by the way, I still have a church trying to hit me for slander because the reality of it is the one of their the victim was I'm sorry, the suspect was a active children's pastor there. At the same time, he was a teacher doing this, and both these two guys had, which is typical, they had their MO, they had their way of going about it. And the principal in 2006 sexually assaulted a child at Fort Worth ISD, did it again in 2011, and he had a method of grooming, and he was doing those grooming behaviors at our campus. Had not gotten to it yet, but he started those games of special favors, special treats, special attention, and building trust and building confidence. And when we put handcuffs on him, it was at a cafe in town. The guy called. This is the craziest. My wife was at the house with me. My phone rings and it's the principal. And I'm like, why would he call me? He knows I'm looking into him by now. There's no, at this point, it's work. He knows he's days away from being arrested. As he calls me, and this is the arrogance of some of these guys that have been committing crime since '93. I can manipulate and twist. So he calls me and goes, "Hey, can we talk?" I'm like, "It's a bad idea." Now, I recorded the phone call, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? Of course I did. But like, that's a bad idea. I said, "You really need an attorney. We need to not talk unless you have an attorney. I need to read you your rights. I really don't think this is good." He goes, no, we need to talk. I need to explain things to you. Can we talk? I'm like, no, we cannot. I said, I'm a law enforcement officer. There's a way we do this, and it's not over the phone. And he's okay. Well, can we meet, but just not at the police station? And I'm like, this is again, this is like, I've been doing this a minute, so I know what the boundaries are. I'm like, yeah, I'll meet with you. And in my head, I'm thinking, this guy thinks I'm not going to be wired up completely with cameras and audio, and I'm going to have an arrest team waiting in another room. I'm basically going to have a SWAT team sitting there because this guy might be trying to kill me. I don't know, right? I mean, it's a real dangerous job if you didn't know it. And so I go meet with this guy, put my little suit and tie on, and sit down with him in a cafe over a cup of coffee with the arrest team in the back kitchen and another team outside waiting for him to try to run. But what he didn't know was before. So now I'm like, I'm going to show up with a warrant. So I went back to Tarrant County that morning before I was going to meet with him and got an arrest warrant for him because we had enough. But we were trying to get that lock solid of the case. But at this point, I'm like, you know what? Give me a arrest warrant because I need to be able to arrest this dude right there. And I wanted to make sure there was no legal gymnastics to get him out. I wanted to interrogate him, Mirandize him, hand him a warrant for his arrest so that he could never say, I didn't do it right. And so we sit down with a cup of coffee and we're just chatting about nothing. I said, let's get to some business. And I read him his rights. And he's like, why are you doing that? I said, because I'm about to ask you some questions about what you did. And so then he's like, okay, yeah, I waive all that. I said, oh, no. Let me read him to you again. I Mirandized this dude twice. And he said, yeah, I'll talk to you, Chief. And now I didn't know what I didn't know. So I just literally said, well, tell me about the first time you sexually abused a child. And he just starts vomiting stuff.
Oh my God.
I mean, now I'm good at interrogations, make no mistake about it. But I was like, this was the easiest interrogation I ever had. And we get all the way through it. And we bridge with him and we make him say, oh, it's not really that big of a deal. Yeah, girls look that way or whatever. You do the thing to get them to keep getting comfortable talking. And this guy, the more I drive him to dark places, the more he starts revealing stuff. And he goes, well, have you talked to this person or have you talked to that? It was almost, and I said, you do realize I'm not your priest and this isn't a confessional. And he just kept going. But he knew that all of it was out of statute of limitation.
Well, that was my question. I'm like, why is he telling you all this now?
Because he knew we couldn't get him on any of it.
Yeah.
But what he didn't know was the arrest warrant in my pocket was for tampering with a witness and destruction of evidence. He thought he was going to get up and walk out of that cafe. And we get all the way done, and he had that smug, and of course, I'm playing nice, but inside I'm ready to just do evil to this guy because he's evil. And he has that smug look on his face, and he's like, "Well, I guess we're done." I'm like, "Yeah, I think we're done," which was the key to coming and smash this guy, right? So they pig pop. He just walks out in handcuffs. But that was the sign. Hey, come in here and get this guy, because I said we're done. And he gets up, and I said, when I say we're done, I mean you and I. And then they come in, cuff him, take him to jail. And a year later, this last I think it was April, March, he pled guilty to failure to report and tampering. I took 5 felonies that had nothing to do with the other abuse cases, but I was able to go back to girls that had been molested by this guy all the way back to 1993, 2006, 2011, and sit with him and say, I'm so sorry that we can't do anything about what happened to you. But let me tell you what we did do. Let me tell you that you can go to bed tonight and know that because of you and your courage to speak up and speak out, that I was able to get this guy. And we're going to make it really hard on him to ever hurt anybody else again. And we cried and hugged, and we chalk it up, and I left that one with even a bigger hole in my heart. And that's when I realized it was time to stop trying to chase justice for something that happened in 1984, because I just wasn't going to get what I needed. And it was time to start doing some things that everybody thinks I'm crazy. By the way, they think that I've got zero chance of making an impact and changing things. But what I know is that I serve a big God that can do big things with broken, small people like me. And we're going to do some good stuff in this space, and we're going to find ways to give the voiceless voices, to let people that feel unseen to be seen, to listen to people that need to be heard, and most importantly, to be able to prevent some things. And so, the unintentional in my book, God has a funny way of doing things with this. I really, what it it's a clinical study in grooming, just because I tell my story. And I had some beta readers, and one of them is in the psychology field. And he told me, he goes, my gosh, we can teach off your book. He goes, I've never had anybody just raw, put it out there, unashamed, unguilty. And I said, well, man, I've come to this determination. The shame of my sexual abuse is not mine to carry. For 40 years, I've had this backpack on, filled with shame, filled with guilt, filled with confusion and questions, filled with um, this weight that I've been carrying by myself. And every time I talk about it, it gets a little lighter. Every time somebody asks a question and I can give them a very direct answer, it gets a little lighter. And I don't feel empty afterwards like I did when I closed cases. And so maybe I'm just on a journey to heal myself. But I think in the process, a lot of people are going to get to tag along with me and find healing. To date, 59 men have contacted me since that press conference, of which 11 are personal friends
Wow.
that are the tough guys that you would never think, that have shared with me their sexual abuse and begged me not to tell anybody. I'm like, that's not my story to tell, but have told me story after story. And almost all of them have ended the same way. I'm not asking for anything. I don't want you to investigate it. I don't want you to help me, but I just want to tell somebody and see what happens. And that's basically what's been happening with a lot of private conversations. And, we now have, I think it's over 230 cases that have been emailed to me, messaged to me, text to me, that people are like, this has happened to my kid, or this happened to me. And, what do I do about it? And so we had a foundation. We created a pillar in that foundation now to really just help survivors of sexual abuse. And the Invictus Foundation, we've been given free martial arts training because we've been building protectors for years. And doing a lot of good in individual stories, but we're now saying, okay, what can we do on a bigger platform? How can we force people to do the right thing? Because what I've learned by being on the inside of government is they're not going to do the right thing unless you make them.
Yeah. The carrot stick approach has to have the stick. There is no carrot. The carrot
Yeah, and
is you don't
I'm
get
a
the
hammer.
stick. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just determined I'm going to be a hammer, and I'm going to keep hammering away at this one thing. I mean, there's a lot of things I'm passionate about. There's a lot of things I care about. But the bullseye is child exploitation of the most vulnerable in places where they're supposed to feel safe: church, school, home, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever. It's those organizations where you're supposed to feel safe, where these bad guys are coming in, and and the crazy thing is that the solution the government has is to take over Fort Worth ISD. They 900 teachers go away, and so in 30 days they hire 900 teachers. They just announced this. In the last 30 days, they've hired over 900 teachers. So
900? How do they
900.
screen all of them? How do they?
Thank you. And so, I got blasted again because I got out there on this and I'm like, there is zero. I've been on the inside. I know what it takes to do it right. There's zero chance they fully vetted 900. They did. I'm not great at math, but 9 times 3 is 2,700 reference checks at a minimum. They did that in 30 days.
There's no way. No.
There's no way. There's no way. They called, let's just say they all had just one employer. That's an additional 900 employer checks. Come on. And so what I know is that yet again, here's our government doing what they shouldn't be doing, and they placated me with this. I'm a meeting coming up. They've created this new position at TA called the Inspector General. So something I wanted. I went down to the Senate and really just pounded away at this last session 2 years ago. You got to have an Inspector General looking at everything within TEA. It needs to be somebody outside of TEA, a fully independent one. So what did the governor's office do and the state do? The guy reports to the commissioner of TEA, and they're doing, so they're checking boxes. They're not really, they want to make sure they get reelected. They want to make sure that it's all about money. Just follow the money, you follow the people. And so rather than doing something that really, and this guy he's quality. I've looked into his background. He's a great dude, comes from a heavy investigative background. He's good at fixing problems, but if you're reporting to the guy you're supposed to be looking into his agency, it should be completely pointed outside. I will tell you, the government, they don't solve problems. What they do is they just move them around. And I'm really hoping, Linda McMahon has put something out recently. I don't know if you've been following this about checking into Cali and Texas and a couple other states and abuse. But, I looked at what they were doing, and they have a couple of school districts that they're looking at. They're not looking at the ones that they should be looking at. And it's not, and just like a lot of those senators from Texas they won't return my phone calls because I'm now, the advocacy side doesn't trust me because I'm former government. The government doesn't trust me because now I'm connected to advocacy. The only people that seem to trust me are the victims. When you know what, I'll stand there. And I'm okay standing there, and I'm okay. I'm not afraid of a good fight.
So real quick for the listeners, what is the TEA, Texas Education Association? What exactly is that?
Texas Education Agency. So in Texas, they're like your Department of Education.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in charge of all of it. One of the most powerful people in the state of Texas is the Commissioner of Education. He can do a lot of things outside statute, outside of laws being passed. He has a lot of authority in his pen. And that I will tell you, Texas leads in a couple of areas. One thing I do believe Texas leads in is this new accountability measures. They got some stuff in there that's really good. That has come out of the last session. The 2019-2023 School Safety Acts, I helped parts of those acts get pushed through. They're good. But the problem with it is that we're focused on things because of major incidences, Uvalde, Santa Fe, Parkland. We're focused in on these lightning strike moments like active shooters. Now, let me be very clear. I don't want to diminish the victims of those crimes. But statistically, when we look at the likelihood of an active shooter walking to a school and shooting a school up and the number of victims that we face there compared to what is happening right now in our schools, it's not comparable. They're not even the same hemisphere. There are so many more children that are being violated and becoming victims from people we put badges on and say you can walk right through the front door. You can walk right past that bulletproof glass. You walk right past that man trap. You walk right past that police officer, that armed offender. And not only are we gonna let you in, we're gonna give you keys to a classroom. We're gonna put kids in that classroom. We're gonna let you groom them and sexually abuse them. But we don't want to talk about that. We're going to spend all this money on hardening these facilities, which we need to do.
Yes.
I'm not saying we don't need to do that. But at some point, someone has got to apply some sensibility to this and say that the impact of sexual abuse, I can only speak from my own personal experience, 40 years of carrying guilt, shame, and questions, doubting myself. I had I didn't go do narcotics and end up homeless. No, I used the drug of achievement and success and perfectionism. And it was just as damaging on me as it would. And so when people say, oh, but Chief, you got it all together. Look at this great resume and this perfect life you've lived. And, you got the 2.5 kids, well, actually 4, but 2.5 kids and the 2 TVs and the 2 cars. Yeah, all that's great. But I'm telling you, I'm just as wounded as everybody else that's ever been violated. I'll never get back my innocence. I distinctly remember what it was like to be a little boy that loved baseball, collecting G.I. Joe action figures, and believing adults would take care of us. I remember that. And then I remember people not helping me. I remember back then they would do corporal punishment. They'd spank you, right? And so here I am. I can't put in words the sexual abuse I'm receiving. I can't explain it because I didn't have the talk yet. I don't even know what sex is. But I know that this hurts and this isn't okay. And I'm bleeding in places you're not supposed to bleed. And I'm going to the nurse and they're saying, you're just pushing too hard when you go to the bathroom. And I can't sit still in class because my bottom hurts.
Yeah.
And so the teacher thinks I'm this kid that's disruptive. I went from being a straight A student to failing every subject in fifth grade. And then I go to the principal's office and I'm going to get swatted this time because it's so many times. And this was that Black Friday was when the real violent sexual abuse happened, when he got real aggressive one time. And so that following Monday, I can't sit down in class. And the teacher's had enough. Of course she's had enough. She's not equipped to deal with a student like me. And she's seeing the behavior and not understanding the cause. So I get sent to the principal and I say to the principal, I get it. You got to spank me. Can you just do my legs instead of my bottom?
Oh,
And you know what he says? Well, you got what you got at home because you deserved it. Now, did he mean I deserved the sexual abuse? Of course not. Of course not. He thought
that you'd been
mom and dad had
spanked. Yeah.
spanked me. And he didn't ask the next question. He wasn't willing to be the one adult, the one trusted adult that would ask the next difficult question, have the courage to say, wait a minute, that's weird. Why would a kid say hit my legs, not my bottom? And then he hits my bottom and I start bleeding. So he sends me to the nurse. They go to the doctor and the doctor, which by the way, I was terrified. He's looking at me. I got another man's hands on my bottom.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. And he's examining the very place that the hurt is occurring. And he says, the nurse is probably right. Let's talk more about his behavior issues. And so all these trusted adults keep re-victimizing me, making me think everything's my fault. And so these people in leadership, these politicians, these administrators, what they don't realize is that if they don't get on this, we don't have a generation. We have a population that I think the data is wrong on. I think it's 1 in 4 men have been sexually abused under the age of 17. I think the data for
I agree
girls
with
and
that.
boys is the same. My family did not know I'd been sexually abused. In fact, it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were talking. She goes, I thought it was the church. I had no idea it was in the house because I just carried it secret. It was a secret.
Yeah.
And you're right, and you're going to love this. And anybody's been a victim will appreciate this, the survived abuse. I now have guilt for lying about it for 40 years.
Of course. Of course.
I now walk around with this. I can't believe I've lied to my kids. I can't, here I'm a man that stands on integrity and says you've got to, your word matters. And now I sit back going, I kept silent for 40 years. And so any of the men or women that are out there that have been sexually abused, it's not your fault. You don't own it. You don't own the shame. You don't own the guilt. What I'm doing is I'm trying to use my pain and turn it into purpose and use it on this platform so that somebody out there might be able to reconcile what happened to them. Or maybe somebody can stop the next child from being abused. Or maybe they can expose darkness in an institution. Maybe they can call people to account. Because what I know is I live in a country that allows me to speak my piece. And I'm going to keep speaking it because we got to do, because I'm not going to get justice. I mean, he's now, by the way, I don't want your listeners to say, oh, how do some research, but he's in jail. Yes, he's in jail for 427 years. But let me be really clear what he's in jail for. He's in jail for possession of child pornography. He's in jail for production of child pornography. He's in jail for the transmission of child pornography. What he's not in jail for is raping me for 3 years. And so justice is a weird thing. And I'm at peace with the fact that it's way out of statute of limitation. I'm not going to ever get justice in the sense of a conviction from him, a guilty plea from him. I'm not going to. But here's what I do get. Every time we stop somebody else from being abused, I get justice. And There's no shame in it, man. And the tough guys that are out there that don't want to get therapy, don't want to tell people, man, I fought 15 rounds this month in the gym. So if anybody wants to say that you got to give up tough guy, I'm going to go to the gun range and shoot some guns this weekend, right? I mean, so I'm just I'm just the same guy I was before. The difference is now I'm showing a different level of courage. It's the greatest courage I've had is standing and saying sexual abuse of men, sexual abuse of boys that are men now is okay to talk about. Stop feeling there's taboo. It's not taboo. It's unfortunately not taboo. My story, unfortunately, is not singular. It's out there, and we just need to talk about it.
I think one of the cool things that you are going to continue to experience over the next few years is someone 5 years from now or something is going to reach out to you and say, I listened to you on this podcast, the NC Sesame podcast. Now, we have 6 listeners, I'm pretty sure, but one of those 6 listeners,
maybe one of them will reach out.
Yeah, but he'll say, what you said, Matt, changed my life. You made it safe. You made it okay.
And be fully tough and resilient and still own your sexual abuse. It doesn't weaken you. It doesn't make you less than a mom. It doesn't make you less than a wife. It doesn't make you less than the career that you're in.
It doesn't make you a whore. It doesn't make you shameful.
And it's not your responsibility. The clothes that you wore, the things that you said. I will tell you right now, I participated in the sexual acts towards the end. I participated in them.
Doesn't mean
I was 11, 12 years old. I was not consenting. You notice I didn't say consent.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you how many rape victims I've sat with. And watch them get re-victimized in the hospital and by detectives and by whatever. Participating for your safety is not consent. It doesn't make you a whore. It doesn't make you impure. I visited with this young lady that was sexually abused recently, 15 or 16 years old, and the thing that she was crying the most about is I'm not a virgin anymore. So I held her hand. I looked at her. I said, honey, you are a virgin still. She goes, what? No, I'm not. I'm like, let me tell you my story. I wrestled for years about, did I lose my virginity when I was 10? And I didn't.
Yeah, that's super powerful because, I mean, there's just so much shame and guilt that survivors carry with them. And you're talking about, so we have these super high achieving survivors. So the military is full of survivors and our prisons are full of survivors.
Yeah.
And so we have these 2 groups of people who need so much help. And 90% of that help is just what we're doing right now, just the talking about it and getting it out and allowing people to heal in the way that they need to heal. Well, and I think that we tend to, and this is, I've been working with survivors of sexual abuse, and I am a survivor, and I've been working with other survivors for 20 some odd years now. And there's always this big argument that, what is worse, the perpetrator or the person who covered it up? And when I look at the perpetrator, like I look at the man who molested me, and I look at these priests who've molested hundreds of kids, and the Boy Scouts, and educators that I've had to handle. So, and I see them as intrinsically broken people. There's something wrong with them that we have to somehow, and I don't know what the solution to this is.
I don't either, by the way.
Yeah.
Let me be really clear. I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, and I don't think that they I talked to this psychologist on one of my episodes, and he talks about how, it's a slippery slope for a lot of these educators. They don't go and say, ooh, I'm going to teach math and molest kids.
I agree with that, by the way.
They get more and more and more access and everything else. And I don't think they wake up in the morning thinking, I'm an evil person. But when I think of true evil, I think of people who pass the trash. I think
they are. That's you. Now you're getting on the bullseye, man. And please keep on that, because I'm going to tell you right now, when you place the reputation of an institution so that you keep your job, what you are is a commercial sex act. And I think we should be charging those people with conspiracy, with accomplishment. Those people that cover it up, or those people that allow it to happen, man, that's the problem. And then when it's the institution, I have a different opinion on how we deal with that. I think those institutions should be shut down completely. And I said that's to a friend of mine at Fort Worth, and he's like, so let me make sure I understand you right. I love when people say that to me because I'm about the most direct person you're probably going to meet. There's
Really?
not
I
a lot.
never would have thought.
You never would have guessed this,
Yeah.
right? I don't mince words. I don't.
Yeah.
I just I'm a simple guy. I just tell you straight down the middle what I think. I straight down the middle think Fort Worth ISD should be folded up and not canceled, shut down. As my stance, not going to change it. Needs to be shut down. And so he goes, well, let me make sure I understand you right. So what you're saying
Yeah.
is, you want to shut down a public school district because of one incident. And I said, you're the problem. You think this is one case. What you should do is ask, how many other times have they done? They didn't figure out how to cover this up in the time they were doing the cover up. They had already done it before.
Well, they were
And
well practiced and well versed.
well practiced.
Yeah.
It was a common practice that they did. And yes, shut it down. I don't know. I don't have to have the answer for what's next to know what it's kind of like we talked about earlier. I can tell you what child pornography, I can tell you when I see it, I can tell you what it is. I may not be able to give you a good definition. I can tell you what an institution looks like that needs to be shut down, Fort Worth ISD. And by the way, no matter what side of the politics you're on this, I'm talking sexual abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
But I could also bring up test scores if you're on that side of the fence. I could bring up teachers union on that side of the fence. I could bring up, I go back and forth with all the other reasons that school district. And by the way, my wife worked there. My wife used to work there. And so right after all this, right in the time all this happened, she stopped working there, by the way. And she runs our foundation now. But yes, I'm advocating for the complete shutdown of Fort Worth ISD. Start over. It's not like, hey, here's the deal. It's not like we kids are not going to have a place to go to school. When you have it's like when we fire a principal and we take away their ability to be a principal. It's not like there's not another person to fill the need.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they
Right.
found 900 teachers, but
Yeah. And by the way, and I have an uncertified relative, a teacher that's uncertified that's a relative of mine. Great teacher, great coach. So I'm going to say something that he'll regret I said, but I'm saying anyway. Non-certified teachers have a higher percentage of sexual abuse in them than in that group than people that are certified. Now, I can't tell you the why. I can't tell you how to solve that. But what I do know is the data is the data, and it's true. And that data is actually TEA's data. Their new dashboard they put out there, which is good, but it's got issues. But that new dashboard's better than nothing. I went on there and started doing some research and poking around, and I reached out to a couple of advocacy organizations like Texas 911 and Texas Scorecard. They're real pit bulls in the Texas area. And I was asking them, hey, I'm starting to see this. What do you think? And they're like, wow, you're onto it. You figured it out. And so, yeah, our solutions typically end up making more abuse, not less. And that's why I'm advocating shut some of that stuff down.
Well, yeah. So, like, when you talk about non-certified versus certified, so when you look at someone who's truly a child predator, they want access and they want immediate access. So, are they going to go through 3
No.
years of education and testing?
No.
They're going
Not
to
even a
go
little bit.
to a small private school, or they're going to be a baseball coach or whatever. And then if the school says you can't work here anymore, then they're going to work at Little League. They're going to volunteer for the Boy Scouts. They want the low-hanging fruit.
And this is why it's really important the federal government steps in. The federal government, and I'm really hoping that if they're listening, somebody from the Department of Education, get me in touch with. I've got solutions to some of this. It's already codified. Title IX already gives us some solutions. Inside Title IX, there are some solutions we can use, but there are 5 points that I think we need to look at, and one of them specifically is we need to have a national registry related to certifications with youth organizations and schools, and if you are convicted on a crime connected to the sexual abuse of a child, you should lose all certifications and ability to work around children. Because what a lot of these teacher unions are doing, and I'm not anti-teacher union. I don't care. I don't have a side in that fight. But what I have noticed is a lot of the teacher unions are fighting for the ability in the HR file for it to say eligible for rehire, and fighting for not taking their certification. And a lot of the DAs are trying to process through these cases more quickly. So they're offering up plea deals that change it from a sex offense to I'm going to call it an administrative offense, failure to report, tampering, obstruction, stuff that, yes, they've hit the elements of those offense, and yes, it's a good charge, but they're letting them get around. And so they leave Texas, go to California. Now you guys are dealing with it, or they leave California, go to Maryland. Now Maryland's dealing. So there's not really, and there's already a structure there. The police departments all have to check the do not hire list. So there is a federal database that lists police officers that are not eligible for employment as police officers. So we already know how to do it as a country, but we're not applying it, in my opinion, where it's more important. And so the federal government can step in and they can do some things that are tangible, measurable, and data based to ensure, or data focused, to make sure that and put it on a database that we can access to make sure we're not passing trash state to state. But it's not that way right now.
Well, I mean, we have these databases for attorneys. You go on the Bar
Right?
Association, we have them for doctors. You can see, and these
Yeah.
are, highly educated professionals. And, you were talking about the teachers union, unions earlier. So in California, the teachers unions are the biggest donor to political campaigns.
Of course.
And so with what the teachers unions want, they get. Fortunately, there have been some pretty big exposés recently with like LAUSD, and then there was a big
Okay.
thing, Rosemead High School, which is not LAUSD, but a huge scandal, and so the legislator there was able to come in and make some changes. But we found that I don't want to say that a teachers union is evil, but they certainly have done a lot of really horrible things that have put a lot of kids at risk, and they do it in the name of protecting teachers. And yes, teaching. I mean, NC Sesame was founded by teachers. I was a certified teacher. It's not like we're out there to get educators. What we want is we want the best people working with our kids, and we want to get the trash out, and so that
Right.
and so it's not being passed or anything like that. And I think it's very easy to do, but no one wants to do it because no one wants to really see the scope and scale of the problem. They know
That
it's
now you're
bad.
getting if you really know how bad it is, then you have no choice but to fix it. And when you look at it, how bad it really is, what we really should be asking ourselves is what's the impact of it? When you look at the impact of it, it's horrific. And there's a case right now that I'm working with a family on. I'm going to give just a little bit of detail for you because it's going to put some context to what you're talking about. I'll say an attorney is trying to force an 11-year-old victim into a deposition over the employment of the educator. And the school district is playing along with it.
Uh,
And so
Being deposed as
I
an
could,
adult is bad enough. Yeah.
oh, I know, but think about this. There in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which governs it doesn't tell you what's illegal. That's the penal code. The Code of Criminal Procedure tells you how to go about justice, is the best way to explain it. Um, it protects victims. We do forensic interviews, which is, for people who don't know what that is, when you're a victim, we try to limit, we've learned the hard way by damaging victims that it's best not to ask them too many questions. So the patrol officer now is trained to ask minimum questions, just to qualify what crime level we're looking at. What are we actually trying to investigate? And then we do this thing at the Child Advocacy Center, which is, it's called the CAC, where they do forensic interviews, where they have these trained child psychologists that they're not law enforcement, but they know what we need. They understand elements of the offense. They understand what we have to have in order to go get a warrant. And often before the advocacy center's finished, we're already going to get the warrant halfway through the interviews because these people are that good. They don't traumatize children when they talk to them. And when we're doing criminal cases, often, because we record those forensic interviews, they are so good at open-ended questions that there's not really a need to counter the argument. There's not like hey, I need to cross-examine certain things. So there is actually in Texas and other states, by the way, I was a police officer in Oklahoma as well. There are certain states that allow you to put that in as evidence and especially in a lot of the preliminary hearings, because there are so many levels to the justice system that often a victim is being re-victimized. I counted as 7 times they've got to tell the full story before they ever get adjudication on their case. So, but we're going to put this little girl on a civil matter. Now, of course, mom and dad are like, no way in hell is my child going to sit in that deposition. And I told mom and dad, what you need to do, and I gave him the attorney's name. I said, you need to call this guy. He'll sue all their asses. And he'll try to get that attorney disbarred. It's unethical what that attorney's doing. Well, you know who that attorney works for?
Teachers unions? Yeah.
And hear me. I'm about, I'm a Title IX investigator. I have acquitted people more than I have filed charges on people. When I do sex crimes investigations, I am not coming into it with I refer to it, I just posted on social media this idea of investigative interference, which is not what you may think it is. I don't go in there, I just chase facts. I call balls and strikes. I don't need to go in there and I'm not throwing the pitch, I'm not catching the pitch, I'm not swinging at the pitch. I'm just calling balls and strikes. And so we don't have to manipulate stuff. I just find the good teachers, pay them more, by the way. There
Yeah,
you go.
exactly.
Pay them more. Okay. Find the good teachers, create a system of accountability. I believe for all you educators that maybe watch this, hey, jump into the things that protect you from false allegations. Keep the door open, keep the lights on, keep your window open. Don't meet with a student by yourself. There's all these things that it's not, none of this stuff's hard. It's all out there. It's easy to do. You could do some. My son-in-law is a volleyball coach, girls volleyball coach. And I'm like, we've had so many conversations about, hey, this is what I think you need to make sure you don't do. One of the best ways to protect yourself is never communicate directly with a student on any kind of social media platform or gaming platform. In fact, any
That should
electronic,
be a fireable offense.
it
Right
should
there.
be,
Yeah.
and it's not. But I'm like, every time you communicate, if you have to communicate, do it on a platform provided by the school that's recorded, or make sure at least another educator's in it or a parent is. Never, not once, should you ever. And so it's not like I'm telling anybody to do something I'm not that it's going to hurt them. And I think the teachers union should change their perspective on this a little bit and let's protect teachers from false allegations and from the slippery slope you spoke about. Because I agree with you, by the way. I don't think now, let me be sure. I agree with the first time they do it. When they're in their victim number 2, 5, 10, 20, no, I don't believe that. They're going in and doing it on purpose. But I do believe often it starts out as a slippery slope and the reality, I talk about it in when I give talks to teachers. I say, when I was a child, he gained trust of my parents. He then gained my trust. And then conversations and invitations slowly moved from appropriate to not appropriate. So slowly that even as an investigator today, I may not have noticed it. And an 11-year-old boy, I sure didn't notice it. It wasn't my responsibility at 11 years old to know what grooming is or what it looks like. It's the
Exactly.
adults. It's the adults.
Exactly.
And so at some point, adults have to be the adults in the room. And so yeah, I don't know. I don't have the solution yet for how we tackle institutions. I'm like on this carpet bomb attitude right now. Just shut them down. And I know that from a executive standpoint, a guy that's led organizations, that doesn't really always work. But you know what? We shut police departments down when they don't function correctly.
Yeah. Well, like when the whole Penn State thing blew up, I was like,
Yeah.
death penalty to that football team. Out, out, out. People are like,
Yeah.
oh, how could
Oh
you
God,
say
Penn
that?
State, you can't do that. And
And
I
I'm like,
love me some college football, but you know what? They don't need to be a program. If you can't run your program, and we're not talking about like, hey, getting touchdowns or reception percent. I'm talking about something that should be pretty simple. Don't rape kids in a shower.
exactly.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
anybody on here believes my cell phone number is all over the place. Call me if you believe that's okay. I'd love to talk to you. No one on the planet's going to call me and say, "Hey, Matt, I think that raping a boy in a bathroom shower by a coach is acceptable." And then the fact that the institution knew about it, the head coach, and I watched Joe Paterno. I thought he was one of the great coaches.
He
Now I don't want
knew.
anything to. No, he knew. He absolutely knew. He should be well, I mean, he's dead now, but they should rip down his statues. They should shut that program down. They should not be allowed to have any collegiate sport. Title IX should have come in there and death penalty that entire athletic program. Period. Full stop. There's no reason. And here's the thing: you do it once, it'll make people pause.
Oh, yeah.
You do it
Oh, yeah.
twice, people are like, "Oh, they're serious." You do it a third time, people will start changing behavior.
Well, Matt, it's too bad we had nothing to talk about for the past
I know,
hour and a
right?
half.
I just now looked at the clock and I'm like, gosh, we've been into this for a while, and I just feel like we just started.
I know. Well, you'll just have to come back.
Well, you send me a date and I'm back. I mean,
Cool.
anytime you need me on, anytime we get the opportunity to talk, I said this somewhere in the middle of this. Thank you for letting me put some of my weight on you. Thank you. I don't want to burden another survivor, but just sharing my story with you a little bit makes my makes my weight a little lighter. And so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here and just tell you a little bit about what happened to me and the work that I'm doing now and the work I've done. I appreciate anyone that comes on this and watches, and everybody that listens to this, whether you realize or not, you're helping me by carrying some of my weight.
Well, I'll have your contact information in the show notes, but if you could tell our listeners how they can get in contact with you and how they can find you.
Yeah, great. So Antkowiak.com is the number one place. And so, we're launching out this book called Unconquerable, a journey from abuse to protector to advocate. And so it just tells you my story, not the graphic details on my emails. You got that as well. It's Matt at teamunconquerable.com. Love to visit with you. If you're in the DFW area, come visit me. We have a storefront martial art gym that we don't charge anybody anything. No uniform costs, no equipment costs, no training costs, no testing costs. Come learn something how to physically defend yourself. Because I know there's some weird thing when you can connect spiritually with physical things. Man, some crazy things happen. So we'd love to have you come visit our gym and say hi. I'm on social media as well, but right now I'm just on Facebook and LinkedIn is where I'm at mainly. And so yeah, thank you so much. I
Matt,
really appreciate the time.
this has been great. And to hear more conversations about educator sexual abuse, accountability, and prevention, follow Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcasts or visit ncsesame.org podcasts. I'm Joelle Casteix, and thank you for joining us in the movement to keep kids safe in our schools.